Um, I'm so glad that you're here today. That means you care a lot about bird care and helping your birds to have a better life in captivity. So this class is kind of the culmination of many years of our educational program. For those of you who don't know, this is our 20th year anniversary of Phoenix Landing, and we've hosted hundreds of events over the years. And like Michelle said, we all learn from each other. You guys are great at asking questions that cause us to go do more research, or maybe there's something we learned at a veterinary conference we want to share. So this class is kind of a lot of different uh, kind of extraordinary aspects about parrots that along the way we thought were remarkable, because parrots are magical and different, and there are things about them that we need to understand to give them a better life. So we're going to start with some anatomy, because everything about a bird is different from us as mammals, and that's just such an important thing to always remember about your birds, because you cannot take what may work for you as a mammal and apply that to a bird, because they eat, sleep, reproduce, fly. Everything about them is completely different. So let's start with the eyes. The eyes are have so much capacity. They can see in a spectrum of light that we can't see. They have very rapid eye movement, because they need to be acutely aware of their environment. Why do you guys think that it's important for them to see above and beyond what we're used to seeing? Why is that so important to them? This is your first opportunity to go to your chat group and type in a bunch of answers. Michelle, are we getting some good feedback there?
Yes, they are prey animals, flight accuracy, they need to watch for predators.
Perfect.
Make decisions.
Perfect.
Food and predators.
That's probably the most important thing, is if they can't see what's about to eat them, then of course there's somebody's dinner. So it's really, really super important for them to have very fine-tuned eyesight so that they can make their way through hazardous territory. Also, some of you probably have had birds that pin their eyes, especially ringnecks and Amazons. That's a really important piece of information for communication. And if you're not familiar with that, or you have a bird that does that, I encourage you to learn more about how that relates to your interaction with your bird, because they're giving you very important information when they do that. Let's see, what else about eyes? Some of this science may have changed since I first put this class together, and it's not that I want you to remember every little detail, like how many cones they have or what part of the ultraviolet light they can see. What I want you to remember is that they don't miss a thing. They see everything. They observe all behavior. They are always attuned to their environment. So that's really important in terms of your relationship with your bird. Moving on to hearing, it's kind of a similar thing. If you can't hear the predator coming, then you become somebody's dinner, right? So birds can hear at a much higher rate than we can. And this gives them the ability to survive in the wild and does not change in terms of their capabilities in our homes. So this is little Pipsqueak, who's still in our adoption center, though he has a few more feathers right now. But he was a great candidate for a picture, in case some of you have never actually seen what a bird's ear looks like or where it is on their body. And again, it's a very heightened sense of capacity that they have that we don't have, that allows them to make decisions. So just keep that in mind. Here's a really important one. Birds have you know, think canary in the coal mine. They can breathe so efficiently. We take a breath in and we get good oxygen, and then we blow out all the carbon dioxide. Birds, on the other hand, have lungs that never deflate. I meant to bring my little prop today to show you about their necks and their lungs, but you never want to squeeze a bird's body because they have lungs that never deflate, and then they have all these air sacs. So the air comes in and it circulates through all the air sacs and goes back out again. So every part of a bird's breath is giving it good oxygen. And so they're very efficient breathers. Why do you think they need to be efficient breathers? What value does that give them? Go ahead and go to your chat and take a guess. I'll let Michelle tell me when you've got some answers going.
We've got flight uses a lot of energy for flight, oxygen equals energy, altitude.
Excellent.
Yeah. Efficiency for flight, constant foraging. They need buoyancy, fly longer and live longer.
Perfect. Yeah, you know, we can't imagine what it feels like to fly, but to fly, especially some birds who have to fly really long distances for long periods of time, if they weren't efficient with their air, they couldn't survive that trip. So it means for us that we have to be very careful about what we have in our homes. And some of you who already live with birds and have learned, hopefully not the hard way, that certain fumes can be very, very toxic to them. So, and because they're so efficient at their breathing, if they are taking in something that's toxic to them, it can kill them very, very quickly. So we have to be extra attentive to what kinds of chemicals and things we have in our homes. You know, can you guys name some of the most toxic ones?
We've got Teflon, oven cleaners, nonstick pans, carbon monoxide, floor wax, bleach, smoke, atomizers, self-cleaning onion, self-cleaning oven, debris, aerosol, marijuana, lead wick candles, all household cleaners.
Excellent. Fantastic. Yeah. And I think most of you know that if you take something out of your environment and you're not around it anymore, and then suddenly it's back in your environment, you realize how potent that smell is, right? I always think of getting on an airplane and sitting next to somebody with really heavy perfume or cologne, or getting in an elevator and how that makes me feel. So I can't imagine how it makes a bird feel to have an earplug in the wall next to them, or somebody cleaning with Windex, for example. It's very potent, those kinds of things around them. So please be careful. Your birds will die so quickly, you won't have time to solve the problem once it happens. So it's better to know in advance that this can be a serious problem.
And I just wanted to break in really quick. This is
yes.
Someone had I think a good question too to think about with vision, back to vision. And the question was, is it true that they can sleep with one eye open and half a brain working while asleep? And if yes, do they get good sleep like that? I know that at least with some birds, some parrots anatomically, even when they have their eyes closed, you can still see their eye through it, through their eyelid.
That third eyelid.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think they're still able to perceive some things through that. And I think it's very hard for us as a predatory species to really know what it's like. That, yes, I think even when they're asleep, there's parts of them that are alert to potential dangers. And that birds are really good at sensing potential dangers and trying to get out of harm's way, and that's how they avoid predation so much in the wild.
That was a good question. I don't know the answer to that regarding the brain, but I can tell you who would. If you join us for the retreat, Dr. Susan Orez is a neurologist, and the brain is her forte. And she's the one that's kind of led the way to show that the capacity of a bird's brain is actually pretty extraordinary. So the old myth of bird brain being a negative thing is actually the opposite. And probably some of you have seen a lot of recent articles on that. They have a part of their brain that's much larger than we ever thought it was. So, but that's a great question. I'll have to research how that relates to eyesight. Thank you for that. So I know that a few times when I have left that pan on by accident, or something happened, I was very glad to have a really good air filter in my house that I could turn it up to high and get that smoke out really fast, etc. So especially if you live with some of those high dander birds like cockatoos, cockatiels, and African grays, a lot of times those species are relinquished to us because people encounter lung problems. So to extend the life of your companionship with your bird, I encourage you all to consider having a really high quality HEPA filter, and just don't fall for those ionizers, because those throw garbage back out on the wall. The other thing we're kind of attentive to when you have multiple species in your home is that macaws, especially blue and gold macaws, are very sensitive to cockatoo and cockatiel dander. And we've had several macaws come through our system that have hypersensitivity syndrome. And, it's a challenging disease and sometimes hard to solve. So be very careful when you mingle species from different parts of the world, that you're not putting them at risk. This is a IQ filter, which has been rated as by Consumer Reports probably as one of the best. And of course, that means it's not very cheap. It's probably $800 or $900. But if you're getting a bird that you intend to spend several decades with, it's definitely worth the investment. So, and it helps them too. All right, here's another part of the body that's completely different. I just think birds are amazing. I'm just always in awe of the way their bodies operate. And in most cases, it has to do with them needing to be able to fly. So that means that they have to be really good at breathing. They have to be really good at digesting, right? So they have this whole other complicated digestive system also. So you're all probably familiar with the crop, which is, just below their neck, usually on the left side. And so first it kind of goes through the proventriculus and gets some, glandular activity going, and then it goes into the gizzard, which is like a big disposal. So that means, unlike some other animals, they can eat things that they can still grind up and not cause them digestive trouble. But please don't fall for you need to buy grit for your citizen parrot, because that is something that's actually pretty dangerous. It can cause crop impactions. So some of you may have lived with birds where they enjoy having their tongue rubbed. They have very interesting tongues, and they use those like an appendage with a lot of capability, and of course beaks, which allow them to get into all kinds of things we couldn't begin to think of opening. And then of course they have saliva. They don't have saliva glands, but they do have taste buds, but just not as many as we do. So they eat a lot of foods that don't give them the same reaction that we might. So let's see, any other questions about the parts of the body we've talked about so far that we need to go back and address?
So there was a question for things like air fresheners or cleaning products used, if it's okay to use them and then allow time to pass and then bring the bird back into the area.
I just don't think it's worth the risk, frankly, to you or to them. I think there are ways to clean and freshen your house with other less toxic things than some of the aerosol air fresheners, which have a lot of chemicals in them, frankly. So all in all, aren't good for the planet or your lungs or your bird's lungs. So, sometimes it's just not worth the risk. Of course, doing it while your bird is not there is definitely preferable than when your bird is there. But if you can find an alternative way, that would be my advice. All right. So I want all of you to leave this class today being what I would call poopologists, right? So there are 3 different parts of birds' droppings. You have the feces, which is common to mammals as well, and you have urine, which is common to mammals as well. But then you have that special white section, which is called urates. And does anybody know why birds make urates? I hope the chat is blowing up.
To remove toxins, to save water. Nope, I give.
What happened? Well, I'm not sure what happened, but anyway, you know, once again, almost everything about a bird goes back to flight. If a bird is flying, they can't be heavy-bodied, right? Amazons are like the most heavy-bodied of the parrots. And if you've ever been to see birds in the wild, you notice that the Amazons are like really struggling to fly, and the other birds are soaring, you know, more gracefully. So it's hard to fly. That's the point. So they have to be very good at synthesizing what they eat. So the urates are basically the proteins of the food being condensed so that they're not very heavy in their body. But they're really, really valuable for you to understand, because if you see urates that are yellow instead of white, then you know your bird probably has some kind of digestive issue, maybe a liver problem, for example. So this is one way you can help stay ahead of some of the other problems you might encounter in your bird's health, is to notice that. Notice if, you know, the feces is purple and they didn't have blueberries, or red and they didn't have beets, and that the urates are yellow versus white, or maybe there's no urine or too much urine. Anyway, just being attentive to that kind of detail. You know, birds that eat more pellets, it looks a little different than a bird that eats more raw food. So understanding what's normal for your bird is a really important thing for you to do as a good zookeeper, and helps your vet understand when you may have a problem or a health issue, what has changed, okay? So we all know first thing in the morning, that poop looks completely different than it does for the rest of the day. So it's more important to kind of watch through the whole day versus that first morning poop. Another very interesting thing about parrots is they have a very long neck. They have more vertebrae in their necks. And any idea why that is? You guys can add some comments to the chat while I continue to talk. One of the most important things about birds, I think, is they have a complete O-ring, a very solid O-ring. They do not have this very sensitive part that we have. And that is really important for their survival, because it means they can turn their head all kinds of directions to be on the alert for predators, right? But it also means that you could safely hold them right there and you're not going to suffocate them. If you hold them around their body where their lungs don't deflate, you will kill them. But if you hold them around the neck, they are perfectly safe. So a lot of times people see their veterinarian holding their bird up by the neck and they think, you know, something looks wrong, but that's exactly what you're supposed to do, okay? So, but having these extra vertebrae also means that they can stretch their neck out really far. So if you're trying to be observant of body language and trying to avoid bites or give your bird more personal space, then you want to understand that they have a reach that's much farther than you think it can be. And the other thing is, if you have an African gray, they tend to collect sometimes in that part of their body. It makes them more susceptible to getting fungal infections, the aspergillosis. So we have to be especially attentive to what's in the air for African grays, so that they don't end up with that fungal infection, which is very hard to cure, and it takes some yucky medicine for a long time. So being aware of the neck is another really important thing as far as understanding their behavior as well as their basic anatomy. Chime in, Michelle, if there's any questions about any of that along the way. All right, and then a beak. I hope some of you are going, ew, because, you know, a beak out of control is not good for a bird, and it usually indicates some kind of medical problem. Birds naturally shouldn't have dysfunctional beaks because if they're able to chew on things and have activities that allow them to keep their own beak kind of groomed, if it grows too long, it's usually an indication of some kind of disease like liver disease. So I know a lot of people, they take their birds to the vet and they think it looks really pretty to have the beak groomed and the oil put on it and all that. We never do that. We never do that unless a bird has come to us from a bad diet and has a liver problem. But again, it's a really good, important thing to be aware of because it can be a first indicator of a more serious disease. So, and it also means that they have the capacity for a lot of strength, right, with that beak. So we have to be careful about respecting their personal space, and especially children around big beaks can be a problem if we're not attentive to teaching our children to respect a bird's personal space. I think it's really important that we allow them to make choices and that we don't try to force them to do things that then cause them to want to bite us. Here's another really kind of interesting aspect of a bird's anatomy, and this is brought to us again by Dr. Susan Orez, who I think understands some of the very special aspects of a bird's anatomy. She says that the phyloplume, that little tiny feather, is attached to nerves, and they're all over a bird's body. And that feather, that phyloplume feather, connected to that nerve is what communicates to the brain. So it can be really important for a bird to know when or where to fly. But it also means that, you know, birds enjoy a little bit of air on their phyloplumes. It wakes up their brains. It keeps them engaged. You know, a bird that just sits in the cage all day and never has any kind of activity or fresh air usually gets pretty oppressed, and they're pretty dull-minded, frankly. So it's really important. Now, that old myth of don't be near the draft, I don't know what that means or where that came from. I would never put my bird near a heating vent. I think that would just be asking for discomfort in the sinuses, which are very fragile in a bird. But to have fresh air and activity is a wonderful thing for everyone, but especially your bird. So don't forget fresh air, because it affects the brain as well as the feathers.
We did have a question come in too that I thought might even be good for the whole group to brainstorm and think about. Definitely when we were talking about beaks, that an overgrown beak, you know, can be a sign of liver issues, and that definitely is something to check out with a vet. But what are some other things that could lead to a beak getting a little overgrown? What do you all think in the chat? Poor diet, which can lead to liver issues. No toys, exactly. You know, lack of things to chew, to whittle on, absolutely. Great, good answers, y'all.
Excellent. Okay, only birds have feathers, right? They're pretty darn unique. They're beautiful. Most of us are drawn to birds in large measure because we appreciate how magical and unique they are. The picture on the left of the African gray shows you the different layers of the feathers. You know, you don't have to remember all the terminology, but what I do want you to remember, I wish I could point with a laser here, but you know, that upper level closest to the head, that level of feathers, you never, ever, ever want to cut those, okay? I know people who think they could just go in with a pair of scissors and chop off some feathers, and it's just a tragedy, a tragedy. If somebody is going to clip feathers, I encourage you to get the information you need about where and how many, because each species is different. And just for interesting information, the two pictures at the bottom with the parakeet and the macaw is a kind of a new way of thinking about feather clips, where you take kind of the bottom part of each feather instead of the whole feather. And this allows the bird to still have some kind of ability to glide down, but the air, when a bird flies, the feathers are all together and the air gives them lift, right? But if the air can go through the feathers, they can't get any lift. But if you cut too many, they can go thump. And that's really, really bad for some species like African grays who are heavy bodied and can have their keel bones broken. So this is one veterinarian in Arizona who has been promoting kind of a new view of feather clipping. So that's just for your information. The most important thing is if you don't know how to appropriately clip your bird's feathers and you think it's important for you to do, get help. Don't just get out the scissors and do something stupid, okay?
And we had another question come in from the Q&A that I think would be great to talk about. And the question is, how significant is the danger birds pose to our lungs? For instance, bird fanciers' lungs. Is there anything we can do besides getting a HEPA filter to minimize the risk?
Great question, because that's definitely a problem. Number one, the HEPA filter. Number two, make sure your birds get regular showers, because that will help the dander go away. You know, I guess it depends on how close you live to the birds. Most of us like to live near our birds and not isolate them. So I don't know. Do you have any other thoughts on that, Michelle?
Well, yes, something that I've learned from you, and that is just a simple thing like spraying down the papers a little bit before you change them so you don't get as much dust.
We're going to talk about that.
Yeah.
Yep, that's coming right up. Absolutely, you're right. Yeah, minimizing what you take in is really important, especially if you have cockatoos, African grays, or cockatiels. Those are the three super high dander birds. If you have lung problems, most doctors will say get rid of your birds, but you know, they each have a different kind of dander. So that's kind of important to understand. But of course, your goal is to avoid that problem, right? So let's talk about some other ways here in a minute, like Michelle said. So kind of wrapping up health and anatomy, just, you know, if you don't have a good avian vet, I'm not just talking about any veterinarian, I'm talking about an avian vet. And we do not work with veterinarians unless they're a member of the Association of Avian Veterinarians. We want to make sure that they care enough about the uniqueness of birds to participate and join that organization and hopefully go to those conferences, because avian medicine is evolving like everybody's medicine, and birds are just totally different. We had one bird die early on, way back 2003 or something, at a veterinarian that was not an avian vet. And after that, we swore we would never, ever go to a veterinarian unless we knew that they understood bird anatomy. So if you don't have one and you would like some help, just email us, so we'd be glad to help you figure out who that might be. All right, this is what Michelle was talking about. And I smoked for many years, so I feel lung compromised and very careful about my lungs. So this is the methodology that I use. If your bird, if you can put paper on the grate and not in the pan, but on the grate, or, you know, where the bird actually poops directly, that's great. That just makes cleaning generally easier. But no matter where you put the paper, I always spritz it a little bit with water, just to, hold down the dander, and then I fold it up from both sides very carefully, and then roll it. And that way feathers are not, all in the air. And that really helps keep down the dander in the household and the dust. And the other really, really important thing is to not fall prey to what some pet stores want you to buy, which is some of that bedding material. That's terrible for your birds and for you, because all it does is hold in bacteria, and eventually somebody's going to have a problem. This is another question that's come up over the years, and we've sponsored quite a few eco tours, and we've worked with a lot of veterinarians, and what we've come to learn is that birds can deal pretty well in a wide range of temperatures. So you don't have to keep your house at 72 degrees or something like that. I actually think birds get hot before they get cold, but it depends on their feather health, probably. But going outside in cooler weather is not as dangerous as I think people think. In fact, as you see from this picture, which is at the Gabriel Foundation, they're enjoying being out in the snow. I've seen a lot of birds play in the snow. That doesn't mean that they can all survive, 24/7, 365 days a year, but they are more hardy than you give them credit for. I would, again, never put a bird near a heat vent in the winter. I think they're very sensitive to that kind of dryness, because they're mostly from parts of the world where there's more humidity. So dry is more of a problem than hot or cold, frankly. So we're not going to get into a lot of the details here. It's just a lot of us, have come across birds with feather plucking issues. How many of you have birds that have a feather plucking problem? You seeing a lot of hands? Well, we certainly have. A lot of birds have come through our adoption program that have had or do have feather plucking issues. Many times we see it resolve itself just by getting them on a better diet, which we'll talk about in a few minutes, or not reinforcing that behavior. When your bird first plucks a feather, you go, oh, don't do that, because you just hate to see it happen, right? Well, basically you've given your bird attention for that. So you don't want to encourage a problem through reinforcement that way. But a lot of times it's just basic diet and enrichment. Birds are so smart and they get so bored. And, if you had to sit in a small room all day with not much to do, you'd probably end up biting your fingernails or pacing the floor or doing something. So some birds feather pluck for similar reasons, pure boredom. I don't think we've seen many that pluck for medical reasons, at least not medical reasons that we can attribute to at this point. And of course, bathing is essential. We're going to talk about bathing a little bit here soon. Wow. I never get tired of seeing this bird having so much fun. I so wish this company still made the Adams. There are some kind of equivalents out there, but I think anything that kind of has motion, especially if it hangs from the ceiling, gives a bird an opportunity to flap without any kind of obstructions. Those are all great opportunities. I mean, it is so hard in captivity for us to find ways for birds to get the cardiovascular activity that they were built for in the wild. I just, we'd have to have aviaries beyond our capacity to even begin to do that. But we can give them opportunities to flap and move and be busy. And if they don't have an outlet for those kinds of things, they develop dysfunctional behaviors, right? So if we can't figure out how to stimulate them in a positive way, we're going to end up living with screaming, charging on the floor, all kinds of negative behaviors that we can't successfully live with. So we got to find ways to teach our birds to be active. And we're not going to go into a lot of detail about cages here, et cetera, or play areas, but more is better. You can never have enough perches. You can never have enough play areas. You can never have enough places to go and things to do. So just remember that, always think about adding something new to your bird's environment that gives them something new to do. I remember when I first got Phoenix that my avian veterinarian said, well, the lifespan of a macaw was 10 years. Well, Phoenix turned 25 this year, and my other macaws are older than that. And I know a lot of you are living with older birds as well. And that's because we're constantly learning how to take better care of them, how to feed them better, how to promote exercise, how to give them mental stimulation, etc. So if we don't do those things, birds just slowly die. And they don't show us they're going to die because they're prey animals, right? So they're not going to show you that they're slowly breaking down until one day you just find them in the bottom of the cage and you say, I don't know why they died. So you can never do enough to keep them physically occupied. I think a lot of you are probably familiar with Snowball and all the studies that went with that cockatoo and how he could dance to the music. I love Pam Clark's idea of letting a bird sit on the back of a rocking chair and set their own momentum. I think people who take a bird through coercion on a walkabout and force them to fly or force them to flap their wings, that can break some trust. So be careful about how you go about that. But you can always teach a bird to flap. And that's what this cue was I was giving this bird, was to flap, get that cardiovascular activity going, right? Another one is bathing. When they bathe, they tend to flap their wings and give some other activities. But here is an interesting study that shows, it was a zoo study that came out in 2011, and it shows what the potential lifespan was versus what the actual lifespan is or was at the time. And you could see that there's a dramatic difference there. So we can never do enough in terms of giving them better care. It's a wake-up call, right? Feet. I thought we were through with anatomy, but I guess not. Oh my gosh, feet. Feet are like a wealth of information. They're also often, birds don't have near enough to give their feet what they need to remain pliable and in good health. So, if somebody tells you that is the right size perch for that bird, say every size perch is the right size for that bird. Every kind of texture, every kind of size. In the wild, a large bird's on a little branch and a little bird's on a big branch. I mean, there is no reason that they need to be restricted, that their feet need to go only a certain way around a perch, okay? The more, the better. The more textures, the better. And here's just a couple of final tips that, again, have come out of all our years of classes and learning from you all and our own experiences. That, when the emergency hits, you don't have a lot of time sometimes. If there's a fire or an earthquake or, some immediate urgency, and if you have more than one bird especially, you don't have a lot of time to get the carrier out, put them in. So pillowcase is just one of those kind of clever things. You can put them under your sofa cushions, near the front door, or whatever. If you have to get your birds out fast, throw them in the pillowcase and head out the door, okay? The other thing is, if your bird gets sick, it is our nature to want to go, oh, poor bird, and stroke them and nurture and touch them. But that is not what helps the bird. When that bird is sick, when you see that they're really sick. So touching them often puts them over the edge. A really good avian veterinarian will not touch a really sick bird. They will put them in with oxygen and leave them alone. So if you have some kind of small container that you know you're going to use if your bird gets sick, that with some heavy bowls that could be put on the floor of that container. You know, it could just be a small plastic tub. You don't have to get something heavy like an aquarium. Just get the right size that fits them. They don't need to move around a lot. When they're sick, they're just going to sit on the bottom there. They're not going to sit on a perch. They just need to be very quiet until you can get to your avian veterinarian. Cleaning, just remember to use a cleaner that is not toxic to them or you or the planet. And, you know, there are a lot of good options out there. We use chlorhexidine at the landing just because we find it to be a good one for killing germs and, you know, fairly inexpensive. Most of you probably haven't heard of arnica. And if you haven't, I encourage you to, because if you ever, you know, get a bruise on your leg from running into something or whatever, arnica is great. And if a bird has a wound or something, you don't put it right on the wound, but it helps keep the bruising from hurting. So that's why bruises hurt often, is because the blood, it kind of groups around that wound. But if you could disperse the blood, which is what arnica does, then you don't feel the pain. And then, you know, if your bird is going to get sick someday, and we all do, why not go ahead and teach your bird to drink from a syringe right now? That's a really good training interaction you can have with your bird. Dr. Orris also recommends that some medicines can be put on nutriberries and dry, and that way you can just give them that piece of food and they can eat it on their own without you having to coerce them or cause more stress. Any other emergency thoughts? I'm sure some of you have had emergencies and learned the hard way what to do or not do in the future. Hopefully minimal, but you know, things happen. All right.
We've had a few questions come in about perches, you know, some more about why we should be careful about concrete perches and if sanded perches are okay.
Excellent. Yeah, I don't think we get into that much of this class, do we? So that's a great question. Yeah, we're not fans of the concrete perches. They're really hard on the feet, and definitely fans of real wood or cotton. And wherever your bird sleeps, which is usually at the highest point in the cage, just make sure that's a really comfortable spot. Even shelves, a lot of birds like to sleep on shelves to put their feet flat. But definitely don't put that concrete perch at the top of the cage just because you want to have them grooming their nails for a longer period of time to make it convenient for you. That's not fair to the bird, and that often causes a lot of bumblefoot and other things on the bottom of their foot pads. So we tend to just not use those concrete perches, frankly. So, you know, as far as health goes, kind of wrapping up health here, I think we all need fresh air and sunshine. Not only does it give us the vitamins, vitamin D3, which we need to create calcium, but it just gives us, you know, a better sense of welfare and mental health. It gives us an ability to enjoy something other than the place where we always are, which for birds is often one place for long periods of time. So, and if you're able to give your birds a place to fly, especially little birds, either in the house or outside in the aviary, that is really awesome for their mental and physical health. And, you know, even if they're not in an aviary, you can figure out ways to give them fresh plants through container gardens or growing something in a pot right next to their cage. There's just a lot of ways to give them a sense of nature and a natural sense of well-being by creating that inside your house as well. But fresh air and sunshine are just so important to all of us for our well-being. And your birds are no different. So this is the question, to fly or not to fly. You know, for a long time, and those of you who may have had birds a long time, you will remember how it was very taboo to even consider letting your bird fly. Everybody clipped wings. We tend to never clip wings now unless a bird flies and gets into trouble, or maybe certain times of the year they go into kind of a nesting phase and they're flying at people. We have to, you know, do a little reset by clipping them. But basically, if you are able to train your bird and your bird lives in a safe environment where somebody's not opening the door unexpectedly, or they can push out the screen, or the dog's going to bite them, or they're going to get under the bed and get stepped on, etc. Being able to fly is a wonderful thing. Of course, it's easier with a small bird, right, than it is a larger bird in a household that has limited space. But sometimes a bird might get lost, and being able to fly is what helps you recover them also. So you have to assess your environment and what is safe or not safe in your environment to make that decision. But also, you know, some birds, even with their wings fully grown out, still don't fly. So why clip them at that point, right? I think it gives them a better sense of well-being if we don't have to clip them. So I don't know if you guys could tell what's going on in this picture, but we were in Brazil looking out over the sinkhole. Let me go back for a minute. This is the sinkhole where we're looking down at birds who are flying. It's an amazing thing to be above a flying bird. Definitely not the norm. So we were watching the birds, and it was mating season. And these two green-winged macaws decided that they wanted this particular spot that had two baby vultures who were just about to fledge. And unexpectedly, all of a sudden, this one green wing went over and threw that vulture down into the sinkhole, which we learned a year later actually survived, which was amazing. But it goes to show when you have a mated pair, their dynamic is very, you just don't want to come between it, okay? But the point I'm trying to make in this slide is that parrots are normally preyed upon, considered one of the most valuable prey animals, but they're very hard to catch. They're actually quite capable of avoiding predators. And to me, that means that they're just super smart, super observant. They hear, they see, everything about them that we talked about in the beginning gives them the tools they need to be the most valued thing for dinner and the least eaten. So that's just really good to understand when you're living with a bird, that you know it has that capacity. So it also means that birds are very social. If they're not helping each other to survive, then of course they're going to fall prey. So we have to make sure that we are providing them a social life that's positive as well, which we'll talk about in a little while. We'll talk about now. So, you know, being alone in the wild means you are definitely somebody's dinner, but we have to make sure that we are not becoming that bird's mate. Okay, that's not our job. It gives the wrong message, and we can't make babies with our birds. So we can't be their forever something, but we can be their friend, we can be their companion, we can be their provider. So we have to give our birds opportunities to have the right kind of relationships in the family. And that means, you know, being part of the activity as well. Sometimes people create a bird room, which is lovely, but if that bird lives alone in that bird room, then that's a very sad, scary, isolated place for a bird to live. And maybe it's a great place to sleep, but it's not a great place to spend all of your life. So We need to be able to give them choices to make positive friends. They can't just escape like they would in the wild and say, I don't want to be here. They are where we put them, basically. So it's our job to learn what the appropriate kind of relationship is, what the appropriate expectations are to live with that bird. And, you know, being extra snuggly and tactile is not always the right kind of relationship that you want to sustain with a bird. It leads to all kinds of potential problems. So, you know, working hard to get something is not only good exercise, but it emulates foraging in the wild. As you see on the bottom right-hand corner there, this dirty Amazon who worked so hard to get the food and probably has a nest somewhere. That's why it's got a dirty belly, hanging upside down, enjoying its pod that it probably had to search for a long time. So in captivity, we want to give them good diets and we want to give them a lot of variety, which we'll talk about, but we don't want to just plop a big bowl of food down in front of them and not have them work for something, okay? Because birds actually enjoy working. Let's see, I think that's the next one. And so let's talk about nutrition a little bit. There are all kinds of great foods, and we'll talk about some of them. I just listed 6 that I thought were supercharged. And I remember we had a veterinarian speak a few years ago, Dr. Costanzo, and he believed that hot peppers were the best food for birds. And I think he's probably right, because birds are often vitamin A deficient. And so hot peppers are just supercharged with the ability for vitamin A. Pumpkin is another good one. We make pumpkin bread at the landing, but any dark colored yellow, orange, red, or green food, the darker the better, is going to give you more vitamin A. Birds need protein just like we do. Quinoa is often a favorite of African greys, for example, and we put it into a mash we make because it's so easy to cook, and it's it's all 22 amino acids. It's just perfect for making sure your bird has good protein. I think all of us have probably been told in recent years that we need more omega-3s, which include flax, but for birds, it also includes walnuts and pumpkin seeds and chia and things like that. Little birds, you know, you can just take any kind of grain and soak it overnight and it brings it to life. And it's just action-packed with enzymes and all kinds of good quality things. Grays and cockatoos also are big grain eaters. You can let it sprout a few days later, but if you just want to give them soaked grains, that's also highly nutritious. And for the little birds, which are more seed eaters, which should not be the food of choice ever for the bigger birds, substituting soaked grains or sprouts is really a good alternative for them in terms of health. But it's just important to have a wide variety, you know? The more colors, the better. I think it's the raw foods often that are the most healthy. We have some recipes for things you could cook, a cookbook, and we have recipes on our website. But I think raw foods is probably the most nutritious. So you have to figure out how to make that desirable to your bird, right? Sometimes it's about how you present it, how you cut it up, what you put it in, how hard they have to work for it, etc. But the more whole foods they're eating, maybe the less pellets they need. So they always need a little bit of both, but you need to make sure they're getting enough of the right variety. So you can't put a piece of corn and a grape in there and say they eat their vegetables and fruit. Okay, they have to eat the good stuff. So it's better to provide only the good stuff than to encourage them to eat pizza crust and pasta and other things and then wonder why they're not eating their mango and red pepper. Okay. Sometimes it's about presentation. So if you have a bird that's used to eating seed and you're trying to get them off of seed and onto a better diet, I turn seed into condiment and sprinkle it on the food I want them to eat. And then they have to rummage around to find that seed. And eventually they realize that the food you're providing them is actually pretty good. But sometimes you can also provide condiments for things that give them an opportunity to, that adds to their diet, like the flax oil or maybe a little cinnamon or coconut oil. Quakers especially love the little pepitas, which are in the bottom right-hand corner there. Sometimes you can take a less healthy food and let it be the conduit to getting them on a better food, right? Here's a little piece of anatomy that most of you are probably not familiar with, the choana. And as you can see in the top right corner, all those little pointy things, right? That's what they're supposed to have. That means they have the right kind of vitamin A. Their body has sufficient vitamin A. The bottom right-hand corner is what they call blunted. And it means this bird is probably very vitamin A deficient. Your avian vet, it's one of the first things they're going to look for when they do their exam is the status of the choana. So that means at that point, you want to get your bird on a very high vitamin A diet. So what kinds of foods are vitamin A rich? Chat, chat, chat.
Carrots, peppers, pumpkin, leafy greens, hot peppers, cucumber, sweet potatoes, kale, yams, dark yellow, orange, or green veggies.
Yay. Good job. Exactly. The more variety, the better. You know, we make a mash at the landing and we pulse up the carrots and the broccoli so the birds, because they pulse really well and they hold up in the freezer really well. And the birds take a bite and they don't even know that that's part of what they're eating. It's so fine at that point. So sometimes, again, it's about presentation. I happen to live with birds who want big carrots and they want to hold their carrots. But other birds are like, no carrots for me, right? So you got to sneak them in. So find the way to get that food in their diet somehow. I don't know how many of you have macaws, but I'm looking at this cantaloupe, and I know one of the authorities on macaws says that cantaloupe seeds is one of the best foods for macaws. And you know, you wouldn't think the seeds would be that valuable. In the wild, we've seen them eating the seeds of all kinds of things that they may or may not eat in captivity. But, you know, I wouldn't give a bird a peach or apricot seed, but I certainly don't take the seed out of the cherry when I give them a cherry. Or the seed of an apple is minimal. You know, usually you don't include that, but it's not disastrous if it happens. And I certainly never take the seeds out of peppers or things like that. So if you have a bird that's not a parakeet, a cockatiel, a lovebird, a parrotlet, and you're feeding seed, you are slowly killing your bird. I just want to say that really clearly because it happens all the time. And we just see birds coming to us, especially the older Amazons, who are so overweight because they've just been eating seed for the last 30 years. They look like little pyramids, you know, because Amazons just don't get out and about like other birds do the same way. They just sit there and get fat on their perches and they die of liver disease. So it's a treat. It's not a diet, okay? Contra freeloading, it means not for free. We do a lot of training sessions, you know, and we find we can have a bundle of food right here and a training option here. in almost all cases, the bird's going to take the training option. They think it's great. It's a good interaction. They like to work for their food. They like to do something they get a reward for. So, you know, if you make eating complicated, that's great. If you have the time to set up different options for getting around the cage or your environment to get to their food, or you take certain foods that are high valued and save those as training rewards and do training on a regular basis, your parrot will be very, very grateful. It is a wonderful way to get them to exercise, to provide them mental stimulation, and to develop your relationship. You know, a training relationship is a very positive relationship. And you're always training. You may think you're not, but everything you do is giving your bird information, because don't forget, they're seeing and hearing everything.
And I thought
Yeah.
we had a quick question that I thought would be good to talk about with food again, you know, because we talked about a lot of different vegetables and everything, but somebody wants to know if they should always be raw.
Got it. No, doesn't always have to be raw by any means, but I just personally think that raw foods are going to provide more natural, abundant nutrition. So, you know, some foods like carrots and pumpkin and stuff like that can bring out more of the vitamin A, but they're also delicious raw. So I guess my bottom line would be to include raw foods in your bird's diet, even if you're providing some great cooked options as well.
Great. And someone else had a question about rice, since it can contain some arsenic. And in some countries, it's advised small children shouldn't eat much rice. Is there concern about this for parrots?
Yes, I've heard some people definitely express concern about that. We make a grain mash that we freeze and often use a little bit of brown rice in that mix, but we tend to steer more towards oat groats, quinoa, kamut. Those tend to be our 3 more common grains. If I was going to feed a bird rice, I would only feed brown rice in terms of nutrition anyway, and then, you know, as part of a much bigger diet. Almonds can have arsenic. If you feed your bird too many almonds, it's the same problem.
And there's also a question about flaxseed. And I think, if I'm remembering correctly, it's Helena, and I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. I hope you're coming to the wellness retreat, because you're asking all these great questions. And I think when we have our cast of veterinarians, some of them will disagree about some of these things. And it's fascinating to see them weigh the pros and cons of different things about, you know, things like flaxseed. Like flaxseed, I know one of the vets has promoted as being good for, you know, helping to avoid reproductive cancers and things. Yet, you know, as with so many things, there's good stuff in it, and there might be some bad stuff too. So those are good questions, I think, for our wellness retreat speakers in a few weeks.
I think I've heard one vet say that flax oil and or seed, don't forget that gizzard we talked about, they can grind up the seed. You don't need to grind it up for them. They have a built-in disposal. I think there's only one vet I've heard who said flax would cause them to be overly hormonal. But for the most part, I think everybody else, all the other avian vets that we think highly of, definitely promote it as a positive thing for anti-inflammatory, positive for hormonal balance, etc. Omega-3s are just generally lacking in our diet more than they used to be, because the way things are grown and the way the earth has been depleted of certain, you know, the dirt is not as rich anymore. So there tend to be more omega-6s outweighing the omega-3s, which puts us out of balance.
Okay. Do you want one more food question?
Sure.
Somebody else just asked, what are some of the best things to sprout? And I actually thought it'd be great for you to answer. And also, I would love to see in the chat if people who sprout want to weigh in also. Because again, we share information with one another. What do you find that is helpful to sprout for your birds?
Okay, so there are two things you can sprout: legumes, which are like pods, beans, or grains. My favorite thing to sprout is mung beans, the little green ones, because they're very fast, uh, sometimes a day or less in the summer, 2 days at most in the winter, and they seem to be generally light. You could also sprout adzuki and garbanzo, but they're a little more, they take a little longer and they're not always as favored. We like to use garbanzos without sprouting. But when it comes to grains, birds can eat grains dry, soaked, sprouted, cooked. It's only the legumes you have to be very careful about, that there's a limited number you can sprout. All the others have to be cooked. And if they're not adzuki, mung, garbanzo, then you have to cook them a long time, or lentil, sorry. The other ones like pinto beans, black beans, etc., you have to cook them a long time or they're toxic. So, but anyway, back to sprouting grains. I love kamut. It's really thick. It's bigger than rice, and we use it in our mash. And every bird from parakeets to macaws loves kamut. They take that big grain and they scoop out the middle. They just love it. It is wheat. So if a bird has an issue with wheat, then I would switch to a different grain.
Okay, and we also had some other people who weighed in that said they also sprout mung beans and lentils. We have some folks that say their cockatiels love them. So yes, birds of all sizes like sprouts.
Fantastic. Sprouts are live foods. You can't get any better than a sprout. And you know, it's kind of intimidating until you do it. I think I prefer using a mason jar with, I think the lids are by Easy Sprout. They come in different sizes, so you just have to turn them over to drain them. But I like being able to see what's in the mason jar because it's clear. But if there, you know, I should put the sprouts on the 6 top foods, because actually they really are one of the best foods ever. I mean, they're alive. A bird in the wild is eating live things. So to replicate that in our homes in a safe way is great.
Okay, just one last food question, because it was someone has asked something about something that was previous in the presentation, and forgive me because I have forgotten, you know, but what food you mentioned that has over 20 amino acids?
Oh, quinoa. Quinoa
Okay.
is perfect. It has all 22 amino acids. It is a perfect protein. Normally we have to put things together like beans and rice, right? To have all the amino acids to make a perfect protein. Quinoa is in and of itself a perfect protein, as are eggs. And eggs is one of those things that veterinarians disagree on that we love to see them discuss. I am personally an egg fan on a limited basis. But you know, just remember that birds need protein. We all need protein to survive, but they are not heavy. They don't need heavy proteins. They need more fruits and veggies and other things as well. So limited protein, because if you have too much protein, that's when they can have kidney disease and they can't process it. All right. All right. Just to remind you, parrots are smart, right? Places to go and things to do. So we are good friends with Irene Pepperberg, and there are a lot of other great studies going on out there also about bird intelligence, but she's done some really great stuff recently about deductive reasoning. I encourage you to go read about what her Harvard investigators are doing. But I don't know about you, but I have yet to find a toy that my birds cannot figure out or undo. I mean, they are complex problem solvers. They use tools. Um, the more we learn about their brains, the more amazing it is as far as their capacity for remembering and multitasking, etc. So make life challenging for your bird. Give your bird opportunities to solve problems. I mean, they get bored just like we do, and they live in a much more limited environment than we do. So they depend on us to provide that kind of enrichment. We've taken in 3,000 birds into our system now, and some of them have had more than one home. And I know a lot of people who've been with their birds for a very long time think that their birds probably, they don't know how their bird's going to adapt. Well, once again, being a prey animal, the most desirable prey animal that doesn't get eaten like other prey animals, means that they are super duper adaptable and resilient. It also means that they can move on to their next homes without as much trauma as we might think. So one of my personal pet peeves is the term forever home for birds, because that may apply appropriately to dogs and cats that have shorter lifespans. But since birds have the capacity, even the smallest bird, to live 20 to 100 plus years, that means it's very hard for a bird to be in one home its whole life if it's properly taken care of. So we need to start thinking of birds in that way. We need to make sure that we provide them with the kind of care that makes them go to their next home, which is likely, in the most positive way possible, and that we understand it's okay that that happens. So they're actually very adaptable. So as Steve Martin says from Natural Encounters, a very wise man, the past does not equal the future. So we need to remember that, when we start saying my bird came from a blah, 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 or didn't do that in that home, or didn't like that person, we need to not let that affect a bird's future. If it didn't like somebody or something in a past home, that doesn't mean it can't learn to take a bath or like the husband or eat broccoli in the next home. So we need to think of our birds as opportunists. Basically, they're a function of their environment, and if we provide the right kind of environment, they are very capable of learning and adapting and being resilient. For those of you who like to go to Dr. Google for some, additional information, here's a couple of enrichment sites, a couple of food sites. I love Jason Crean, the top right. He's really good at information about different kinds of raw foods and their nutritional value. And top left, Chris Porter, the Parrot Enrichment site. She's got a couple of books you can download for free on her site. They give you ideas about how to make toys, because some of us are not creative enough to think about how to put something together. She's got some great ideas. All right, let's talk a little bit about behavior, because it is really the key to having a good relationship with your bird. We see the failure of successful relationships usually because people have an expectation of what they want their bird to be that is a bird has not agreed to. And maybe the people have gone too fast. They want the bird to step up right away, which is not what a bird normally wants to do, because remember, it's a prey animal. So we tend to break trust early on, and this makes it hard to rebuild the relationship. So we always encourage people to give the bird the opportunity to set the pace. Let the bird show us what they're willing to do. If they come towards us, then they're interested. If they back away, they need more space. It's not helpful for us to invade their space and try to force them to do something before they're ready. So in the wild, the bird is just going to fly away, right? It's fully empowered to make all the choices, which is to get away. And in captivity, they're often in small spaces with limited options, and yet we still try to force ourselves on them. And we don't understand them. Why did he bite me? Why doesn't she want to go with me? You know, on and on it goes, because our expectations are not reasonable. So all I ask of you is for the birds in your life to make every interaction a positive one as much as possible. To take your cues from the bird and the bird's body language. If the bird says, I am not comfortable, back up. Don't go forward. Show that bird that it can trust you, that you are acknowledging that it is not comfortable and you are not going to ask it to do something it doesn't want to do. So we can only say from experience that this seems to be one of the primary keys to success in the relationship. We're not talking about health anymore in terms of diet. We're talking about an interactive, amiable relationship. So remember how we talked about how a bird can see everything and hear everything, how we move, and some of us move in a world, you know, doing what we need to do when we need to do it, and we expect the bird to kind of get with the program. Maybe that's not what the bird wants. So look at these videos and tell me what you think.
Ready?
What happened there?
Bird was surprised, got startled. Startled him, moved in too fast.
Excellent. What happened there?
Too low. Not close enough, too low. Out of reach, too far away.
Excellent. You know, and sometimes we want a bird to do something and we go, oh, here's this. And they come towards it and we go, and come here. Now come here. No, come here. And you know what? We keep changing the rules. So if you ask a bird, if you want to give a bird something positive, make it possible for them to actually achieve that. Otherwise, what have you done? You've just broken trust, right? So if you give this bird an option for something, you've got to deliver. You've got to pay what you said. Don't tease. Okay, teasing a bird, they just they don't want to play the game anymore. So in this case, those birds really wanted that treat, but after a while, they were just going to give up, right? All right. A couple of important things happening here. What do you think they are?
Good level and speed. Waited for interest and then moved in. Did not startle the bird and gave him easy access to the spoon. Letting the bird see and determine. Waiting for interest. Taking her time.
Love it. Very good. Exactly. It's just like she went up a little bit, bird moved a little bit. She moved a little closer, bird moved a little closer. It was like a little dance, right? And what I think is really important in this case is most people could not walk up to this bird and hand them something with their fingers. And if they did, they would get bitten. And then they would blame it on the bird. But you know what? It's not the bird's fault. So this is a relationship that involves two parties. You both have to be comfortable. And the fact that she's using a spoon to deliver the treat lets her feel more comfortable, and she feels more comfortable, the bird feels more comfortable. Nobody's invading each other's personal space. So she brought it up to the beak level, so the bird didn't have to lean over, and slowly went in. It's a really positive, non-coercive way to interact with a bird. I know for years I moved way too fast. Type A, get it done, right? And the bird would go like this. Slow learner here. That was just not appropriate. That was not, the bird did not feel comfortable with that kind of approach.
Okay,
So when a
and
bird, yeah, go ahead.
we have a request, and this is our technical challenge for the day. Can you play the video again?
Sure. Which one?
The last one.
She waits for the bird to be ready. Very good. If that bird had moved away, then Jenny would have moved away. Because again, she's taking her cue from the bird. If the bird's interested, she's interested. She's not trying to force him to do anything. Therefore, the second time she offered the treat, he didn't move away. He was very willing because he knew he could trust that she would provide it in an appropriate, non-threatening way. So again, going back to expectations, we find people think, and the old school always told us, that step up was the first thing we were supposed to teach our birds to do. Well, I want to tell you, I think it's the last thing you're going to teach your bird to do, and maybe never. Okay, birds are cautious by nature, and they're going to give you you have to earn their trust, and you have to keep their trust. And if you break that trust, then you have to start all over again. So stepping up to me is a magical, unbelievable thing that a prey animal is willing to let me touch it. I never take it for granted. I always praise it. I always treat it. And it's not something I expect or never reward. Okay. So if your expectation is to have this hands-on cuddly bird, then I think you're setting your relationship up for failure. If you get one like that and you touch it in the appropriate ways, terrific. But if not, you know what? They are amazing, brilliant, beautiful creatures that I love to live with regardless. It is not part of my expectation. Because, you know what? If you touch them too much or in the wrong places, not good things happen. So anything below the neck to a bird is a very sexy thing, and you cannot deliver. You cannot be that bird's mate as much as you think it is the most important creature in your life. And what happens if you lead that bird on to think that, negative things could occur as a result, now or in the future. In the picture on the left, the bird is actually dropped, his sex organs have actually fallen out of his body. It's called a prolapse because he's been so overstimulated. And that is not a good thing. That is very hard to solve. But what's more common is that you get behavioral problems. You put, especially a cockatoo, you put a bird down, they scream for your attention, you go back and pick them up, you put them down, and this pattern repeats itself until eventually they're screaming really loud, or they're pulling out their feathers because you haven't picked them up recently, et cetera, et cetera. It's just really, really important to have a minimal tactile relationship with your bird that rarely, if ever, goes below the neck. I don't care how many times they tell you to put it right there and over here and down there. That's not your job. That is not your role. That is not your part of the relationship. So a lot of times birds are doing things we don't want them to do. It's very hard to solve a problem and teach a bird what not to do. It's much easier to teach a bird what to do, and that replaces the things you don't want them to do. So every time you have a behavior issue, think about how you can redirect your bird to something that you want them to do, that you can praise, reward, encourage, and build up as part of their primary behavior repertoire. So in order to do that, we have to find the things that motivate them, right? So a lot of times that's food. For some birds, especially cockatoos, it's drama and praise. For other birds, it's that you walk away and leave them alone. You know, you have to find what it is that motivates your bird. And what motivates your bird today may not be what motivates your bird tomorrow. So Just like you might get tired of chocolate ice cream and tomorrow you want something different, right? So I want you to watch these two movies. The first one at the top, when we're training or we're watching a bird's behavior, we always keep our eye on the bird. Okay, tell me what you see happens with the bird's behavior.
Yay! Maybe with those crackers, those.
Was this bird motivated? Let me back up. What was the reward that Jackie was giving this bird for dropping the disc in the bowl?
Verbal praise, a treat.
I didn't see any treats.
Yay, praise, hooray, nothing.
Right. That's exactly right. Praise. So was that motivating to this bird? No. What did the bird do? When she offered the disc the second time, the bird turned away. Wasn't interested in playing the game, right? Not motivated. Okay, watch the second.
Good. 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 Good.
Was this bird motivated? Yes. Was this bird being given something that it valued as a reward? Yes. Did it cause the bird to want to repeat the behavior? Yes. So behavior is a consequence of the environment. And if the thing that is provided to the bird after the behavior, not before the behavior, is motivating enough, the bird will want to come back and perform the behavior again, okay? So it's not what happens before, it's what happens after. In this case, she told the bird good when it did what she asked him to do, and then she provided a treat. That treat was sufficiently motivating that the bird said, I will do it again. I hope that makes sense and gives you some basic tools for positive interaction. Okay, here's a nervous bird, and Jenny's trying to make friends. Again, keep your eyes on the bird and tell me what you see. Some good answers.
Bird is hesitant, leans away. She keeps getting closer. The bird kept leaning away, using the cage as a barrier to protect itself. Running away, coming over for the treat. When the bird got encouraged, the bird started running from her first, and then bird is afraid.
Yeah, if she moved closer to the bird when the bird was not sure about something positive happening, this is Chelsea, by the way, then Chelsea would go to the back of the cage. But when Jenny would just stop and wait and not chase her or force her, then Chelsea would come forward. And then once she got a treat and she realized it was a positive interaction, you notice she didn't run to the back of the cage as far the next time. She came forward more and more confidently. So you have to build that trust by earning it. And we have to make sure that we always are aware of a bird's personal space. A bird will tell us, you're too close to me. You know, don't you find that, those of you who have birds already, people come up to you, can I touch it? Can I touch it? You know, and if somebody came up to me and wanted to just say, can I touch it? Can I, you know, what would you do? You'd probably either be defensive or angry, or, you know, we don't just move right in and touch things without permission. And the birds feel the same way. They especially feel the same way because they're prey animals. So we have to be even more attentive to the little details they're telling us with their body language. And they're telling us so many things with crests and feet and beaks and eyes and feathers and tails. They have so many ways of communicating that we need to learn and pay attention to. We tend to just be verbal, right? They tend to tell us how they feel about a situation by their body posture and all the parts that they have that are so full of communication. So don't read all this. The point is, we tend to live in a world of labels. We tend to say, that is this, that is that. You know, he doesn't like this, or he only wants that. And what we do when we label anything, but especially a bird, we narrow its world of opportunity. And especially since we know they're going to go on to more than one home. We don't want to label them as not liking men, or only liking women, or not liking baths, or must not have broccoli. I mean, those are the kinds of things that narrow their world and their opportunities. And it's not them, it's how we present it. It's how we've earned their trust, or presented that food, or made that bath fun. And what happens when we label a bird, we blame it on the bird. It's all the bird's fault then. That bird is defensive. That bird is aggressive. That bird is mean. And what do? We stop taking responsibility, and we don't try to make it better. And then the bird goes on to the next home with this label, mean, aggressive, whatever, and it spirals downhill. It's our job to say that we need to solve the problem. We need to take responsibility. Does that make sense? And if you find that you're having to explain a bird's behavior by going into a very long story about it, then I ask you to back up and look at this moment in time that it happened and how you responded to that behavior. Did you put the bird in the cage and close the door so it had no choice? Did you pick it up and put it somewhere it didn't want to be? You know, what did you do at that moment that made that bird not want to perform some other behavior in the future? Take responsibility for that moment and figure it out. So we all have problems, right? We all have problems in our relationships, whether it be with humans or birds or dogs or whatever. Bosses, jobs. The easiest way to solve a problem is to not have the problem, right? So if your bird is doing something that you don't want it to do, if you can prevent access to that opportunity, then you've solved the problem, right? But if you can't do that, then you have to figure out how to replace that behavior with something that is positive, something you can live with. And if you're able to provide an incompatible behavior, that's even better, because you can't do one thing with your beak when you're doing another thing with your beak, right? So again, it comes down to us taking responsibility for teaching our birds what we want them to do, finding what motivates them to do that, and reward them accordingly, right?
You ready, Corky? Corky, that bird.
I don't know what to say. That problem could have been prevented, right? And even if the behavior still occurred, the response could have been different. This person almost enjoyed the drama of teaching this bird to bite. This bird is not a mean bird. This bird was taught to bite and rewarded for it. I see a bunch of chat stuff happening there.
Yes, people, it made them sad. It sickens them. The signs were all there. He shouldn't have been pushed to step up. That guy doesn't deserve a bird.
Couldn't agree more. Couldn't agree more. But it brings the point home that if we have expectations for something that the bird does not agree with and we force it, we're asking the bird to exhibit a behavior that we don't really want to live with. And who's responsible for that? We are. So when people tell us that they got to bite, how do I keep this bird from biting? Well, of course, the first thing is to just not get in their space, right? They can't bite you if they're not in your space. You're not in their space. But the other thing is to pay attention to what you did and don't do that again, right? The bird told you. And a lot of times a bird will tell you in advance in more subtle terms. And I love the African grays. They're very clear about, you know, they push you away, they nudge your finger away. Maybe they just take a little, you know, just a little bit. And then you keep moving in and insisting, and eventually they bite you. And you say, why did that bird bite me? It came out of nowhere. No, it didn't. That bird told you every which way it could, don't touch me. And you insisted. So you earned that bite. You not only earned that bite, you taught the bird that you're not paying attention. And the next time, they're not going to give you an opportunity to withdraw. They're just going to go right ahead and bite you. And it's your fault. It's just your fault. You have to take responsibility for that. Birds are not naturally mean, except for that greenwing, which threw that young vulture into the canyon in order to get a nest space. Birds in the wild are not purposely going after other birds just to be mean. They're either trying to get a mate, protect their babies, and or nest. So it's just that simple. If a negative thing like that happens in your home, you have to take 150% responsibility for that problem and try to figure out how to solve it. And the best way to solve it is to not let it happen in the first place, or teach your bird what to do that is positive and reward it and praise it and make it an important part of their daily life. So we've talked about this a few times and I just can't say it enough. If you decide to live with a parrot, you have to make sure you have proper expectations. Everybody wants in their applications to us the perfect parrot, the one that gets along with everybody, it never screams, it never throws its food on the wall, you know, it wants to step up, it wants to go everywhere with them, it wants to talk, all the things they want it to do. Well, your bird has its own personality, its own set of experiences, and its own preferences. So, you know, you have to learn from each other what it is that works. And if you think you want your bird to be something specific and they're not, then your bird is going to end up stuck in a cage in the laundry room or the basement, or, you know, given up because you haven't figured out how to live together. So your birds are quick, easy learners if you can learn to be a good teacher. You're always teaching. Just learn to teach in a way that builds a positive behavior. And I love these two birds here. This is Napoleon and Josephine. They came to us. They were former breeders, of course, totally petrified of anything to do with humans. they have gone to an amazing home which built them a thing in the ceiling where they live and walk around all day long looking down at their humans, and they have the best wonderful life, and the humans appreciate them and they appreciate the humans, and they found what works for both parties. But again, you have to figure out what works for your bird, not just what works for you. So kind of in closing, you know, a parrot is a lot of things, a lot of beautiful, extraordinary, incredible, magical, wonderful things. And you just have to decide if you can live with those kinds of personality traits. Those sometimes we try to work against nature, and when we try to work against nature, which is a bird who's good at communicating, good at throwing food on the floor, good at pooping where you don't want them to poop, you know, desperate for good training and intelligent puzzle solving opportunities. If we can't live with those things, then, you know, we have to think about whether or not a parrot is the right companion for us. So recognizing their natural behaviors is paramount for success. I think this, yes. So I can't stress to you enough to think about, if you're an avid learner, which I hope you are because you were here today, and I'm grateful to you for being here and caring about the parrots in your life or in your future life, and continuing to learn is the most important thing we can do, right? The more we can learn about how to make lives better for our parrots in captivity, which is not actually natural for them, the more successful they will be and the more they will thrive. And actually, the more you will enjoy each other. So continue, no matter where you got your parrot, what species it is, or how long you've had it, please be an avid learner and try to add one new thing from this class to your bird's life. Just start with one new thing. Thank you.
I'll just ask if anyone has any more questions. Please go ahead and type them in. And I'm also curious if there is something from this class that you know you're going to put into practice in the next week, whether it's something Anne discussed or something that was shared in the chat. Just if you could go to the chat box and share what that is. What's one change that you're going to make to try to do something a little bit more for your birds? Hot peppers. Sprouting. Get them outside more.
Fantastic.
Excited about mung beans. Love it. Carrots. So we've got food. Replace the concrete perch they sleep on. Stop rubbing belly.
Yay.
Try kamut. And we love seeing this because, you know, it's always, we all like variety in our lives too, right? More foraging, give them coconut oil and cantaloupe. We like variety in our life. Our birds do too. It's always good to try something new and see how it goes. And we also love hearing if your relationship improves with your bird. We're always working for a better relationship with everyone in our life, right? Read the body language better, more enrichment activities, change their way of cleaning. Some food puzzles. Someone just ordered kamut seeds while in this class. Getting an emergency kit together. A platform perch for sleeping. Great. These are great things. Thank you all.
I would like to share, since we obviously have good learners here, just to recommend a few books for anybody who wants to read. For behavior, Don't Shoot the Dog. Great book. Rebecca O'Connor, Perfectly Trained Parrot. Perfect is kind of facetious. We have a cookbook, Nourish to Flourish. And Rosemary Lowe, who's probably the person who's visited more birds of the wild than any person on the planet, the Parrot Companion, and she talks a lot about what birds do in the wild and how that translates to our homes. So those would be my top 4 picks from today.
Yeah, those are great. And I know Don't Shoot the Dog is also available on audiobook if some of you are avid audiobook listeners while you're cleaning those bird cages and stuff, you know. So I know someone also asked, are there any hanging toys that come close to replacing the Atom?
What is it, Michelle? There's an online on Facebook, Macaw Love.
Yes.
And then there's a Canadian company. I just can't remember the name of it. And then we have a recipe for how to use electrical conduit and PVC, which we can email you. But,
yeah, and Cassie shared Orbiter too.
oh, good.
Yeah. Okay, and someone had a question about green cheek conure, getting them outside more. It is 80 degrees in the sun. How long is it okay to take her out for fresh air in her carrier?
Oh, such a great question. Okay. Anytime you take your bird outside, even if it's in an aviary, make sure that there is some cover on the top, some safe cover that allows them to hide from what they perceive to be a predator and to get out of the sun, and that they always have water in their cage. I think if you see a bird panting hard, wings up, that means they're like, that's how you see a bird sitting in a nest cavity, really hot. That's when you want to bring them inside or let them put their feet in cool water. But they're pretty good. You know, the thing about feathers are mostly for insulation, and they allow the body to either get warmer when needed or cool off when needed. Birds are incredible. Their anatomy is unbelievably evolved. I mean, they came at the time of the dinosaurs, right? They're way older than we are in terms of evolution. So they have the capacity to deal with heat and cold, but always make sure your bird feels safe, okay? No matter where they are, especially outside.
Yes, and someone else also asked about the slides, and we will be emailing the slides to you within 24 hours. And also a little Nourish to Flourish brochure that has the recipe for our landing mash, I think an egg dish that you can make for your birds, and a pumpkin bread.
And you can make, Jason Crean's site has some good information, but you know, back to the raw foods again, some hold up better than others, but we make it like for 4 to 5 or 6 days. And that's really nice when you can stir a bunch of stuff together and then just pull it out of the refrigerator. Same with the mash. So even the raw foods you can make in batches. You just can't freeze it the same way.
Yes, and someone else asked also for the electrical conduit Atom-like toy. We can email out a link to the instructions on that too. Absolutely. Wheatgrass is also good for birds. Yes, somebody had asked about that. And good for us, right? Well, thank you again, everyone, for joining us for this class. And again, spending us, yes, we can list the 4 books in the email too. Absolutely. Okay, someone had one more question, where to find chlorhexidine for cleaning. You can get that on Amazon.
$18.95 for a gallon. Use our Amazon affiliate link, please, which you can find on our website, which gives us a percentage. And you just want to dilute it so that it's a kind of a light blue with some hot water. It doesn't leave residue. It's great for cleaning.
Great. So thank you again for joining us today. And we hope to see you at a future class, whether it be a virtual class or an in-person class once it's safe for us to have those again.
Thanks, everybody.